welcome to Addicted to Murder. This is Courtney, licensed professional counselor with over a decade of experience.
And this is Trisha. And Courtney, I'm pretty sure you've seen a lampirid in your time.
Lampirid. I feel like I know what that means, but I don't remember what it means.
It's any of a species of insects, including fireflies and glowworms.
Oh.
You've been to New Orleans. Were you there when the lightning bugs were out?
No.
Oh.
I was like in the city.
Oh.
Yeah.
So maybe they aren't so easily seen. I've never seen glowworms before, but I've seen fireflies / lightning bugs lots of times when I visit my cousin back east.
Oh. I don't know if I have. I probably have and just didn't realize that that's what I was looking at.
It's like they're on the east and the south.
Right.
Like where it's humid, I guess. I don't know. Because he's in Philly, so that's not very south, but they have lots of them.
It's not, yeah. And I went to college in New York.
Oh.
But I wasn't really there in the summers.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. They're obvious if you see them.
Got it.
So if you don't remember seeing them, you probably haven't.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing them.
They're cool. I like them a lot. I wish we had them here.
That would be nice.
Yeah. I guess you can squish their butts and get the glow stuff, the bioluminescence or whatever it is on your fingers. And it's mean.
It is mean. It's
but
why
I
would
guess
I do that?
I guess you can do that. I guess kids might do that,
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
But we're back for the Sunset Killers Part 3.
Yes, we are.
One more part after this. And we'll get into it, but I got a question for you.
All right, go ahead.
It's been really, really cold here lately.
Yes.
So would you prefer it to be 15 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny or 70 degrees and rainy?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
But probably 70 degrees and rainy because I am just always cold already. So when it's cold, then I'm just extra cold. And it's so hard to feel warm.
I also choose that, but for different reasons. I wouldn't go outside for either of those situations. But I, unlike a lot of people, like the rain and the gloom. And it makes me feel cozy. And it's very good for napping.
That's true. Yeah.
So,
well, warm rain is not the worst.
Right. I just don't really get that seasonal depression or whatever, the sad.
Lucky you.
Yeah. So I know it does affect a lot of people and I understand why it does, but it doesn't bother me.
Right. Yeah.
I kind of I don't really need to move away out of this climate.
Right.
Some people can't handle it. They need somewhere sunnier.
Yeah. I'm not so bad that I need to move away, but I definitely have my fake sun lamp that I turn on in the winters to help me out a little.
Got it. Well, so that was my question. And we are now going to recap Doug Clark and Carol Bundy, no relation to Ted.
All right. So in our first 2 episodes, we learned about Carol's abusive childhood and history of finding herself in abusive relationships, as well as Doug's relatively privileged childhood, although devoid of much love and attention from his parents, and his desires to find the easiest way to live with the least amount of effort. We ended with the 2 of them meeting in a bar, having a strange first date at Carol's home, and Doug already starting in with the manipulation tactics.
It's just occurring to me that besides the, I guess, emotional neglect that Doug was getting from his parents, he didn't have much of an abusive upbringing.
No, not that we know of, anyway.
Yeah. So, most of our killers do. Besides, maybe Randy Woodfield is the only one that I can ever think of.
Right.
And he wasn't emotionally neglected as far as we know. But, so just keeping that in mind, compared to Carol's childhood, which you're not supposed to compare traumas, I get that. But he was very lucky in that regard compared to what she went through.
Right. He doesn't have those same experiences with violence at a young age that we
Or sex abuse
that we typically see with a lot of our serial killers.
Yeah. Okay, well, these 2 misfits have now met each other and have formed a unique bond and a somewhat romantic relationship, but not what most would consider a normal relationship. Carol was still sometimes seeing Jack on the side, although that usually cost her money or something to get his attention because he kind of was just, he used her. Doug did not like Carol paying off Jack's car or buying him jewelry, and he did not like that he had access to the thousands of dollars that she had in that safety deposit box that they shared. And he told her to put that money into the bank, but she never ended up getting around to doing that. Sometimes she and Doug would go to the bar that she and Jack used to go to, and they would run into each other, and Jack and Doug did not like each other. This, of course, flattered Carol because she liked to think there were two men kind of fighting over her. Doug also scammed Carol. He would give her, rent check, but then turn around and ask to borrow it before she could even cash it. Carol's eyesight got better enough after her cataracts procedure that she could go back to work nursing. Let me just turn off my, sorry, there it goes. Okay. My text. Doug was one upper. We all know one of those people, right? That it sounds like with Carol. If she showed him a short story that she wrote, he would say, well, I wrote a book. He dominated the conversations, talking about himself, with her not really getting much in edgewise, even though he would call her a motor mouth. He did confide in her that he had a fantasy of kidnapping a young girl and torturing and raping her, making her a sex slave. Carol was all for it. She herself wanted to be a captured slave. She liked a little bondage, and Doug had used restraints on her during sex. Doug wanted to test her limits. Quote, after they made love one night, he pointed out that throughout history, people had shown no reverence for human life and had slaughtered each other wantonly, which Carol had to agree was true. It was fun to kill, he told her, and he thought that any woman who loved him should be willing to kill for him, end quote. He also told Carol he was a low-level hitman for the mafia. Courtney, what do you want to touch on regarding the blossoming relationship here? I don't know that Doug actually had killed anyone prior to Carol. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So last week we talked about how a teenage Doug would boast to the boys at his school about his supposed sexual prowess, trying to impress them. I see this, one-upping of Carol and his claims about being a hitman for the mafia as falling into the same type of behavior. He likely had pretty low self-worth and was trying to prove his importance to her by claiming to be successful and dangerous. And Carol, in response, with her probable dependent personality disorder, saw his bravado as strength and power, which is just what she was looking for in a man, someone to tell her how to live.
Yeah. Well, Doug was confusing. He would move in and out of Carol's house. He would sometimes encourage her to sleep with other men, but he continued with his intense dislike of Jack. In fact, if she actually did start to date anyone else, Doug would show back up and take her attention back from that man or woman. Carol got pretty close to a man named Art, and her two boys really liked Art. She told him that she shared a safety deposit box with Jack with her $12,000 in it. Art told her to get that money out of there. It was the oldest trick in the book, he said. Carol, disbelieving that Jack would steal from her, was upset to find that he took nearly half of her savings for himself and did not tell her about it or ask her. Doug intervened on this relationship with Art, and Art seemed like he really cared for her and he actually made a respectable living, but that, Doug wasn't going to allow that to happen. And at this time, Doug also convinced Carol she needed a gun. And so long as she was getting a gun for herself, why not buy one from him as well? He told her she needed to have the guns in her name because he was a convicted felon for a robbery in Indiana, which was a lie. Courtney?
So we haven't talked about attachment in a while, but I think that it would make sense for Carol to have what's called an insecure attachment style. So she was rejected by her mother, and then her father seemed to go between loving and supportive to violent and abusive. So this pattern would contribute to Carol's constantly forgiving and taking back men who repeatedly manipulate and harm her. So Doug capitalized on that and recognized that Carol was a woman who craved direction and love and would do pretty much anything he asked her to do in order to prevent him from leaving.
It's too bad it didn't work out with her and Art.
I know. He sounded like a nice guy.
Yeah. Doug seemed to affect how Carol was treating her kids as well. She lost her temper easier now, and actually she slapped the boys, which was a new thing. She was also walking around naked, which was odd to the boys, and they were worried that Doug seemed to control her and that she actually enjoyed being controlled by Doug. One night, Chris, that's one of her kiddos, saw through his room Doug entered the apartment covered in blood, and the blood was even in his teeth. The story the boys were told later was that Doug was in a motorcycle accident. However, that did not account for Chris seeing Carol clean a bloody knife that same time. Doug came home bloody again. This time the story was that Doug got hurt fighting a guy that was trying to steal his car. Doug told the young boy that he killed the man by slitting his abdomen. Doug told Carol that he was going to kill Chris next, and Chris overheard Doug say this to his mom. Doug didn't know that, and he told Chris to go find his knife. Chris pretended he couldn't find the knife. Doug then used a comb for a prop and showed Carol how he would kill Chris, and she responded in a flat affect, seemingly not alarmed by the situation, that yeah, that would kill Chris. At this point, Chris pretty much withdrew emotionally, and he was terrified of Doug. Courtney, what do you think is going on?
I mean, so much, but, essentially, Doug has secured himself the role of being Carol's master, essentially. He has told her what he likes and how he wants her to act, and she is shaping herself into the person that he wants her to be in order to keep him around. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of Kanye West and Kim Kardashian in their relationship.
You'll have to enlighten me because I don't know anything about that dynamic.
Where really, I think a lot of fans saw that, once Kim and Kanye got married, he was very controlling over her clothes and her image and, what, how she did her hair and everything. And it was very different look from, what she was presenting herself as before they got married. And then once they divorced and she sort of got back to her own person again, it's very different.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a little pop culture reference.
Yeah.
Courtney.
Exactly. Which is weird because I cared nothing at all about any of that, but I just know things.
Okay.
But on the other hand, right, it seems like Chris was maybe starting to realize what was going on, or at least recognizing that Doug was not telling the truth about why he was coming home covered in blood. And so Doug may have felt threatened and therefore tried to scare him back into submission and silence. And as for Carol's reaction to Doug threatening to kill her son, I wonder if she had become desensitized to Doug talking about killing and murder, possibly even fantasizing with her about how to do it, that it didn't raise any red flags for her anymore. It was just him talking about wanting to kill anybody else.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is weird.
I feel bad for Chris. Doug kept coming back to Carol's place covered in blood. Sometimes he had his own injuries, but he always had an excuse. Carol was seemingly excited by it all. She even went with him to pick up a prostitute and watch. Carol had a new car, and Doug wanted to test it out. When he brought it back, the gear shift was messed up, and a divot in the door panel was now there. He said his gun went off by mistake. That same evening, 17-year-old Marnette Comer, a runaway, went missing from the Sunset Strip. Doug would later tell Carol that he picked her up and she was a sex worker, which pissed Carol off, that he went without her to go get a prostitute. And he shot her 3 times, dragged her body to a ravine, and sliced her open to hurry along decay and to prevent the body from being found. Courtney?
I mean, like we were sort of talking about earlier, in order to please Doug, Carol was adopting his habits and fetishes. She's also associating violence and sex with being loved, confirming the lessons she was taught by her father and her previous relationships. And after a while, that line between, doing things to make Doug happy and actually enjoying it started to get blurred.
Doug was in and out of Carol's life still. He had other girlfriends he would stay with. He would use them, manipulate them. One he thought was funny because this was just really mean. He encouraged one of his girlfriends to gain 60 pounds because he thought it'd be funny. And then he basically said, "You're too big for me," and he moved out. He started to get physically abusive to Carol's boys beyond just threatening to kill Chris. He now punched him all over. He would use a studded belt on Chris as well. He didn't seem to hit the other boy, who was 6-year-old Spike, at least not as much. I think Carol was beginning to realize that her boys were in danger, or at least on a more selfish level, they were in her and Doug's way. So she petitioned to get them their custody transferred to their father, Grant, and they didn't tell them. And she deposited them to Grant, who promptly sent them to his paternal grandparents many states away. So I feel sad for the boys that it ended up being this way. And I'm sure they had some serious problems from this trauma, but I'm glad they are out of the house. How about you?
Yeah, I would be shocked if Chris and Spike didn't experience impacts from their traumas. I mean, physical abuse, being threatened, hearing the talk about killing and murder, and being exposed to like sexual behaviors at a young age would definitely lead to lasting damage of some kind. And, I would like to think that the decision to give custody of the boys to their father was a difficult one for Carol. She had experienced both the feelings of being abandoned by her mother and being abused by her father and stepmom. So neither choice felt like a good one. Like either she was abandoning them or she was keeping them in an abusive setting. And neither one probably felt very good for her. Mm-hmm. But I am glad that the boys ultimately sounded like they ended up in a stable home.
Yeah. So this little excerpt's from Wikipedia, and this is going into some of the murders that are going to start happening. So on June 11th, 1980, stepsisters Gina Narano and... let me start over. June 11th, 1980, there are two sisters, step-siblings. One's 15, one's 16. Gina is 15, Cynthia is 16. They were picked up by Doug. The two ran away quite a bit from their somewhat chaotic home life. They willingly got into a car with Doug. I'm unsure if they spoke of a transactional ride or what, but he forced one of them to fillet him, and he was not able to get aroused. This was not the first time this happens to him, by the way. So he got angry, claiming that she did not know what she was doing, and shot her sister behind the left ear. So the one girl's still trying to, do the sex act. He's angry that she can't do it. So he turns and shoots the sister in the back seat while this is happening. He then shot the other girl in the head. So being sure not to shoot himself in the process, the two did not die. So he shot them both again. He drove to a garage in Burbank and dragged them out of the car. He got blood all over the place, and he just kept walking through it. He didn't seem to care. He put them on a bed that was already in there and arranged them in a hideous display. I'm not going to get into it. All the while playing with them and violating them. And when he was bored, he left. He went and he showered and he ate. He had a few drinks, took a camera from one of his many girlfriends, went back to the garage, photographed the bodies, put them back into a blanket and back into the car, and he drove toward Disney Studios. He dumped them out down an embankment where they landed near some power lines and went back to his other girlfriend's house in the wee hours of the morning. Courtney?
So Doug has officially crossed the line into serial killer territory. He seems to be, working out an MO. So his victims are young sex workers. He uses sexual assault, followed by shooting them, and then dumping them somewhere semi-public. And now it seems he's also experimenting with the idea of trophies or ways of revisiting the experience of his kills.
Why do you think he was unable to become erect?
My guess would be is that by this point he needs the violence to become aroused.
Or maybe, as we see, he becomes aroused with dead bodies.
Possibly.
Although, throughout the book, he was having sex with Carol. I don't know. They mention on more than one occasion that he wasn't able to perform.
Right.
So, the bodies were found the next day by a state highway worker. Carol, who gave a different name, I want to say she said Claudia, she called the police department to possibly implicate Doug after this because he told her what happened. She was trying to tell them without really telling them that her boyfriend may have killed these two women. She called from a payphone in front of the police department, but she was so ambiguous to the point that the officers just kind of thought she was making a joke or scamming, maybe not all there in the head. She was kind of talking in circles and riddles and, confusing them. Anyhow, down the line, these tapes would be replayed, and had things gone differently, like perhaps the specific detective that hears them later on, had they heard them much earlier, things could have been much different because this detective was like, wait, no, this person knows things that they shouldn't know. So anyways, that same evening that Carol called the police, Doug came to her house and told her to turn on the news. The story was of a man named Vic Weiss. His body was found in the trunk of a Rolls Royce, and Doug claimed that he was responsible, and he told her it was an initiation to a mafia group. Courtney, there isn't much to believe that, Doug is, a hit murderer. What are your thoughts on this, and also Carol calling the cops?
So, unlike Doug, Carol does have empathy and a moral compass, even if she doesn't always listen to it. And so it's possible that Carol was feeling some guilt about supporting Doug's actions so far, or perhaps him actually killing young women felt different to her than just hearing him talk about it. But as for the mafia killing, I think that's probably total BS, but that Doug was again trying to gain clout and prove to Carol that he was an important and dangerous man.
Do you think another motivation for Carol might have been that she was pissed off that Doug again went and got runaway sex workers without her, and it was a way to maybe get him in trouble for that?
Yeah, that's definitely possible. Also that he ran to a different girlfriend that night.
Yeah. She's got a jealous streak.
She does. So that could have also been part of it.
Yeah, it's tough to know. She's an interesting one, as we'll see, especially in the next episode. Doug, now that he was confiding in Carol, was also threatening Carol. He allegedly told her that if she ran, he would find her or her children. Carol decided the safest plan was just to cooperate with Doug. The two decided to officially move in with each other to a new place. The two of them now just like to talk about murder all the time. Doug would parade women in front of Carol and occasionally would have sex with prostitutes with Carol in the car, telling her she was stupid and incompetent the whole time. Carol seemed to find comfort in the way he treated her. It was familiar, after all. She saw herself as a good person who sacrificed for the men in her life. Her victimhood may have been annoying to Doug, but Carol could not see that, though. She felt that both Jack and Doug were selfish. Jack sometimes would beat people up, but Doug actually killed them. Doug told Carol that he had already killed 50 people with the goal of killing 100. She called Doug a sociopath, and he got really butthurt by that comment. Courtney?
By this time, Carol was just in too deep with Doug. And it seemed like she was accepting that his treatment of her was just the life she deserved and was destined to be stuck in.
Why do you think he got all hurt when she called him a sociopath? You think it struck a chord?
I was going to say, I think maybe it hit a little too close to home for him. He's like, oh shit, she sees me.
One evening, Carol and Doug went looking for a sex worker. It was to be Carol's first time killing someone. They picked up someone who in the book was named Kathy. I don't know if that's the real name. I think there's some Jane Does, and this might be one of them. They agreed on a price for giving Doug oral sex, and during that act, Carol and Doug had a miscommunication on who was going to shoot Kathy. So I think they were doing an eye contact thing through the mirror, you, me. So Carol had the gun, and she decided, I guess, she wasn't going to do it. So she was handing the gun to Doug, but she handed it off in a weird way, and he ended up in his left hand, and he shot Kathy, but didn't kill her right away because of this. Carol seemed unfazed by what happened. At this point, Kathy's head was on Carol's lap, and she was bleeding all over Carol. And Carol just seemed to be like, okay, whatever. Doug told her to strip Kathy down, which she did, and that they all drove away to a gravel road that had a pond at the end. The two of them dragged her out and left her in the bushes, and she might still have been alive at this point. Courtney, so it was a botched killing, and Carol didn't actually do it, but what are your thoughts on it?
So this was the first murder that Carol participated in, even if she didn't give the death wound herself. And based on what we've talked about so far, it's not necessarily surprising that Carol was not more upset in the moment. There had been such a long period of time where talking and fantasizing about killing was an everyday occurrence in her life. And that could have been, desensitizing her to the whole idea of it. And then also just a hypothesis. Carol may have built up the expectation of what it would feel like to kill a person so much and for so long that the actual event was underwhelming or maybe even disappointing.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like when I saw Shrek for the first time.
And you thought it was going to be the best movie ever, and then it was like, it's fine.
Because everyone built it up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with Shrek.
There's not.
And apparently the donkey that was the model for Donkey just passed away at age 30.
Oh.
I saw it on Instagram because I follow a lot of donkeys. Because I love donkeys.
Yeah.
I digress. I apologize about that. This is another excerpt from Wikipedia. So on June 24th, 1980, Clark killed 2 sex workers, 24-year-old Karen Lee Jones and 20-year-old Exie LaFay Wilson. Jones was found that day behind a Burbank, California steakhouse, murdered by a single gunshot to the head. Later, police were summoned to Studio City, where the headless body of Wilson had been found by pedestrians. Clark had lured Jones and Wilson into his car, shot them, and dumped their bodies in plain sight, but not before removing Wilson's head. Clark took the head back home and stored it in the refrigerator. Bundy, upon seeing it, put makeup on it before Clark used it again for another bout of necrophilia. She later recalled, quote, "We had a lot of fun with her. I was making her up like a Barbie with makeup." On June 27th, the couple put the freshly cleaned head in an ornate wooden box and dumped it in a Hollywood alleyway. All right, Courtney. Well, Doug is officially a necrophiliac, but what is going on with Carol?
In terms of her behavior with the head, I mean, she clearly was not getting off or engaging with the head in a sexual way like Doug. But perhaps her interaction of putting makeup on it was her way of kind of joining in the fun and being able to share in the experience with Doug in her own way.
Do you think she was experiencing like an adrenaline rush? Like, I mean, I can't tell if she's enjoying this or she really is just going along with him because she doesn't want him to leave her.
I think my guess is probably a little bit of both, right? If you kind of like comparing it to like a still healthy-ish relationship, right? Like you get with a partner and they have a hobby that you've never tried before, and so you try it to go along with them, and then you eventually end up liking it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think it's something like that.
Got
Like
it.
she probably wouldn't have done any of this on her own, but as time went on, she developed a liking for the act of murder.
Yeah, or at least watching him do it and
Right.
helping. Well, that's where we're going to end today. Is there anything else you want to say before we do? Any last minute thoughts that popped into your head about this weird pair?
If only Carol had gotten some therapy when she was a child.
I know.
So much of this could have been prevented.
She wouldn't have been, she would have had more self-worth, hopefully. And
Yes.
neither Jack nor Doug would have hopefully have done what they did to her.
Right. Exactly.
Anyhow.
And when she called them selfish, I mean, she was totally right.
Yeah.
They were.
Yeah. I don't think either one of them really cared about her. She was a possession.
Yep.
And, you know, when she could help them out, they liked her. And then when she couldn't, they discarded her.
Exactly.
So, yeah. All right. Well, I guess that will be it for today. And we will hopefully wrap this up next week.
Yes, we will.
Okay. Everyone be safe and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye.